There's only
For you right there.
Okay, welcome to the long haul. I'm going to just let them introduce themselves more or less. There's two Davids, a Mark and a Julia. I think Needle Exchange has been at the long haul for a long time and kind of just roughly associated with the long haul. So, and I had thought for years that it'd be better to like weave our communities back together because we used to be close and then it's been. But anyway, hopefully they're gonna say a really good history. And I did want to also just. Well, I thought maybe there'd be a really overwhelmingly huge crowd. There's like a little crowd. The Long Haul is an activist space that's been here since 1979. We're a nonprofit organization. We're entirely run by volunteers, and we are composed of these different tenant groups, which right now includes NEED, the East Bay co-housing group, Slingshot Newspaper, and some question marks. We have a couple of vacant offices, so if anybody wants to be another one of the names there, this would be a good time. And we also have volunteer spaces for all the projects that are here, as well as just actually keeping everything running. So, so feel free to see us about that. And thanks a lot. Have a good time.
You're first.
My name is David Motorsbach, and I'm been a part of the NEED collective on and off since 1990.
Oh, my name's Julia Clems, and I've been sort of like a major on, a major off, and a major on. But I started in late '97, early '98, and then dropped off for like 4 years later, and then joined back again a couple years ago.
I'm Mark Wilson. I've been with NEED since late 2005, early 2006, and I'm still here.
I'm David Showalter. I've been with NEED since 2013, I guess, and I'm also a researcher at UC Berkeley, so I've done some research on the history of harm reduction in California.
So with that in mind, we're going to try to say things that are very factual and true. And David's going to take notes and keep an eye on this. So I should start
Yeah.
from the beginning. Well, the Needle Exchange Emergency Distribution wasn't called that when it started, but the conception of Needle Exchange itself arose in the mid to late 80s in different communities around the world. The United States was really slow in responding to the HIV epidemic and the hepatitis epidemic with pretty bad legislation and health policies that prevented the emergence of practices like needle exchange. A lot of people were learning about it that were involved in HIV from experiences in Europe, particularly in Amsterdam and places where needle exchange was just a kind of a quick, easy response to the emergence of HIV and other viral-borne diseases spread through blood-to-blood transmission. And so people started, a few places that David could talk about in more detail, started doing needle exchange. Philadelphia and then San Francisco were notable to us here. And in 1989, there was the International AIDS Conference and a lot of demonstrations, a lot of activism, a lot of coming together of people in San Francisco and in the Bay Area for that watershed AIDS conference. And out of that came a lot of people were like, oh, needle exchange is a great thing. People started seeing what was Prevention Point volunteers were doing, and said we should start something like that here. And some of the key people that were talking about that were John Iverson, who was kind of one of the main linchpins in ACT UP East Bay, Gerald Lenoir, who was an AIDS activist and part of the Black Coalition Responding to AIDS. Write that down, we'll figure it out. In the area, and a few others that I won't go into detail. And then there were some meetings that happened in spring and summer of 1990, and the idea was, okay, let's start doing it as quickly as we can. Let's not talk about it for too long. Let's just start doing it and then figuring out where we're going to go. Some of the key things that people tried to figure out were, where do we do it? We were trying to be aware of the Tarzan syndrome, where we didn't want to be these white activists swinging in on a rope into the middle of a community that we had nothing to do with and trying to save them with Needle Exchange. So we deliberately picked a location that was kind of more neutral. It was the stroll area back in the time, back in 1990. That was, but it was like neutral. There was bus lines that went in both areas, and that was San Pablo and Hearst. No, San Pablo and University Avenue. And we set a date. Okay, in a month now we'll start doing it. We started collecting supplies, deciding who was going to do it. We were going to go out, get arrested, and make a big fuss and get in trouble and raise the issue. And that's why I got involved in it, because I was like, oh, get arrested. It sounds like fun. A bunch of us kind of, we got arrested in the summer, I think, or in the spring, chained ourselves to the doors of the health department, and that was like kind of a working up for that. And there was a small group of people that involved, that were like Robert Glick, John Iverson, Chuck, Rindy, Kathleen Clannon, other people from ACT UP, John Winters from ACT UP East Bay, Jennifer Ting, John L. I got picked also because I was a social worker and homeless stuff, so I got kind of make the connections, and I invited Berkeley Free Clinic folks to come in and so on. But we basically just did it. We went looking for. We wanted a perambulator baby carriage, because we loved the idea of the baby carriage, because we put the word out. Our flyer was said, on the first day we sent out some flyers to different methadone clinics. We were just kind of throwing them out there. We didn't really know who to reach out to, but they said, look for the baby carriage. And then we were trying to get like a old school pram, but we couldn't find one. And so we just had a regular kind of baby carriage, and we put all of our supplies in there. And then the day that we started, which was in September 1990, we just walked the corners, walked the couple blocks around San Pablo and University with our stroller, and had a table on the corner, and then walked with the stroller. And somebody came up and exchanged with us, and we were stoked. We were like, wow! And that person was actually a plant to make us feel better. But the word got out, and then every Thursday, because that was the idea. Well, just every Thursday from 6 to 8, and then we fixed on Hearst and San Pablo a little bit. We kept the presence on San Pablo and University with the tables, and we just started doing that, and it was really fun. People would walk up and they'd say, "Oh, you've got a baby in there." We'd be like, "Oh," lift up, can I see? Oh, and people started doing Needle Exchange, and we went and visited Prevention Point. We learned a lot about Prevention Point and how they did their stuff. And our first funding was just donations. The two ways that our money came was Dr. Clannon, who is the AIDS doc at Highland Hospital, gave us money. And then she started tapping shoulders of other docs who would send us money. Like $100 was like a hell of a lot. It was like a month right there. We had so we started adding on people coming. The first time one person, then about 5 people, then about 10, then about 20, and then we were in business, and we were learning how it worked. We learned about other needle exchanges and started to kind of feel like we started to learn what we were doing. A lot of our volunteers, some of the key volunteers, were people that had been injection drug users in the past. Scott Halim and Chuck Reese come to mind as kind of key people who would entertain everybody else with their war stories. Of like, oh yeah, you just have to stick this big jagged shovel into my arm, and da da da, and taught the volunteers a whole bunch about what they were doing. We learned a lot from Dave Purchase in Washington, Seattle, Washington, who sent a video that he'd made a few years earlier about what people had to do back then to keep to reduce their possibility of infection. And part of that video, which is like stunning to watch now, is like how to boil your needles for 15 minutes in boiling water, and how to soak it in bleach back and forth and back and forth and stuff. And that was pretty interesting stuff. But we got into it, and we didn't get arrested. We started, like I said, we got money from Kathleen and the doctors, and we also started to get money from Earl Baldock, who was one of our earlier, he was kind of the revolutionary Mau Mau connection. He would have fancy parties with gay, he was like the left-wing gay lesbian organizer house, and he would have house parties and earn money for us and send us money. And we subsided on that kind of fundraising for pretty much our first year, just raising money and doing that, and having a nice group of people and doing the exchange every week. And within almost a year, we hadn't gotten arrested yet. We dealt with a few issues. You know, there was newspaper articles that we were attacked, or not attacked. We were called out. And there was a lot of controversy around needle exchange as genocide. The can't remember the names of but it was like African American ministers were very suspicious, to say the least, about needle exchange, because they were suffering in their populations a lot of drug addiction. During that time in the early 90s, late 80s, the county was cutting methadone programs, funding for methadone programs, and so they were seeing like what's going to happen. Now they're cutting methadone programs, and now these white activists are giving away needles and encouraging drug use, and that was a big debate. We had a lot of work to do ahead of us that we didn't really know that we were going to be doing as well, which was proving that needle exchange didn't cause people to do more drugs, and that it actually reduced HIV infection. And we didn't really know that we were going to be involved in that, and that was a multi-year process that before those things were made true, beyond doubt. We just thought we were going to get arrested and raise a fuss. We didn't get arrested, and then it was the following spring, early summer, and by then we knew the police in the police department that didn't like us and that were out to get us, and some people put in some phone calls to those police and basically said to them, "This is a citizen calling, and I really think that you need to go and arrest those people." And soon enough, we got a visit from the police one week in the end of June, 1991, saying, "Beware, we're gonna arrest you next week." So we're like, "Yay!" Yeah. And then decided who was gonna get arrested, and sure enough, they came on 4th of July and arrested us. And so we got our first thing out of the way that we wanted to do, and that ended up being part of that we got arrested in 1991, right as the folks in San Mateo were getting arrested. Our arrestee was Scott Halim, who was one of our volunteers, and we went to trial that fall. By like August, September, the trial had begun. It wasn't, what kind of trial was it? A misdemeanor trial, which wasn't going to go to the Supreme Court and overturn the bans on needle exchange, but it was just going to be part of the larger battle, because every time you looked at the newspaper, there was a trial going on, and I don't think very few people got guilty. Did anybody get guilty? No, nobody got guilty. We got not guilty eventually. But during the trial was we kept on doing needle exchange, and during the trial there was a election for city council, and some of our more local politics people, like John Iverson, put the pressure on candidates who were running for election or re-election and saying, what is your position on needle exchange? And when everybody said what their position on needle exchange was, we turned it around and said, okay, put your money where your mouth is publicly and fund needle exchange. And then by that time, Paul Dalton was involved as a needle exchange person, and he actually wrote the first proposal for us to get funding from the City of Berkeley Health Department. And that began our little. They gave us $20,000 a year to start out. No, but don't buy needles with it. You can't buy needles with it. You can do anything you want with it, and we'll look at it away as much as we can, but don't buy needles with it. You can't buy needles with it because that's illegal. And that's what we did. We bought lots of needles. Yeah, we bought lots of sharp container needles. I can't emphasize in that early days how important it was, our local connections at Prevention Point, kicking us down needles when we would run out, and the North American Syringe Exchange Network, which is run by Dave Purchase and some of his key folks up in Seattle. They would send us needles, and we kind of moved in on the Berkeley Free Clinic, took over some little non-offices, they're little hallways where we would pile our stuff, our supplies, and go there, pick up our supplies and take it out, and whoever was driving that day would drive their car down, pick it up, and go out there. We kept on growing and growing and growing, and I think the spirit of giving some time for other folks to talk, I'll jump ahead a little bit and say that the early 90s were kind of, after we realized, okay, we got arrested, but big deal. By the time we got arrested, we thought that we would get arrested, make a big fuss, and the city would come in, the health department would say, oh yeah, what were we thinking? Needle exchange is like the right thing to do, and we'll come in and do it, and that would be part of regular practice. And that was wrong. We realized that was wrong. That number one, wasn't going to happen. Number two, it was a bad idea. We learned from examples in other cities where localities and local governments had gotten involved in needle exchange and really botched it up and done a really bad thing with it. For example, in New York City, David Dinkins, was that David Dinkins or pre-David Dinkins?
Pre-David Dinkins. Dinkins came in and shut it down.
He came in and shut it down again, right? I remember there was something bad about him. They had a needle exchange. They had free legal needle exchange, but you had to go in once a week to the third floor of the building that included on the second floor the police department, and the sheriff's was on the third floor, and then the exchange was on the fourth floor, and we heard stories, like horror stories like that, like that's a bad way to do it. We figured, oh no, we're going to be doing this for a little while, and so we kind of started looking at it in a different way. It wasn't so glamorous and exciting, it was actually work that we were doing. We heard a rumor that Prevention Point, who was a couple years older than us, had a birthday party, a three-year birthday party, and had a cake delivered from the health department saying, happy birthday, suckers. Thanks for doing our work for us, was basically the thing. And we kind of, that story, I don't know if it's true or not, resonated. We were like, yeah, we are doing the work for them, but this is good work, and there's something, we're on to something. One of the things that was happening at the same time was the milieu, the environment that we were emerging from. There was a lot going on at that time, like Food Not Bombs and Cop Watch, for example. Organizations that were very horizontal, very scalable, and even though we didn't start doing, we were definitely not the first needle exchanges. We caught the idea, but the model that we had was very replicable and very collective and transparent and horizontal, and that was really important to us. But by the early 90s, we were learning what we were doing, and some of the key concepts that we were picking up were, number one, the idea of secondary exchange, that you could give 20 needles to somebody because then they would take it and give 10 needles to somebody else. Or that we realized pretty quickly that people were exchanging for other people, not just for themselves, and we wanted to encourage that. I said from the beginning, we weren't called Needle Exchange Emergency Distribution, NEED, at first. When we first started, we were called Needle Exchange Emergency Deployment. And we all, after a couple weeks, we thought that was a stupid sounding name. So then somebody came up with the right idea of distribution. And that word just sounds perfect. It didn't really mean anything for some years when we realized that we had to do, at first because of economic constraints, we had to do a one-for-one exchange. And we always hated the idea of a one-for-one exchange, but that's what you did. And we could only exchange up to 20 needles at first because we didn't have more needles to give out. And we were learning a little bit, unlearning a lot of this mythology of the junkies that would just take and take and take, and if you give them an inch, they'll take a mile. And we heard all these stories from our peers. But as we learned more, as we actually engaged with people, we were realizing that that's really petty and bullshit. And like needles that cost 7.5 cents each, and so we tried to raise more money. We raised money through what we called bleaching, which was like we couldn't spend our $20,000 or $30,000 a year on needles. So what we did is we bought condoms and sold them to local AIDS organizations, and they gave us cash for them. And then we used that cash to buy needles. We turned into an organization called Bob's Bleach Company, and that we would have bleach parties where we filled up little bottles of bleach and gave them out to everybody, but sold them to ourselves for cash, for $1 a piece. And so we got more and more money that way. But in the early 90s, it was tough going. We had a 20 and then a 50 limit, and then we pushed it up to a 100 limit. We did as much as we could to have different types of needles, shorts, longs, thin needles, and stuff like that, to try to hear what people were going. So the first thing that was important was secondary exchange. The second thing was listening to people and trying to do what they wanted, unlearning our junkie fear and doing what people wanted. The third thing was the concept of satellite exchanges, where when we said secondary exchange was just, was more informal, but as the 90s grew on, we wanted to really support that, and we called that satellite exchanges, where you could be deemed like a local person in your place, and we would give you more and more needles to try to set up your own little. We thought for a while that's what our future was going to be, was coordinating multiple satellites. But we couldn't really handle that because we didn't have enough money, basically, and organizing. By the mid 90s or so, through that idea of listening to people and talking with them, we realized that that one thing we realized is that bleach was a bad thing, that it ruined people's needles, and they didn't want to use their needle because they ate up their barrels. You're supposed to keep a bleach in for, what was it, 90 seconds or a minute, 2 minutes, and and it was just eating up the rubber and making your thing unuseful. So we really wanted to push more for just get those needles out there, and then that's when we started to learn about distribution. We started hearing more about overdoses and started learning about prevention of overdoses. Everybody started losing friends around the mid 90s to overdose. We learned about issues like wound botulism, abscesses. Help me out. Are there any other disease issues that were
Necrotic fasciitis.
Fasciitis, flesh-eating bacteria, things like that started scaring the heck out of people as we were kind of realizing that, okay, we got a handle on this on the very local level around HIV, but there's other things that we can do as well, and dealing with some of those issues involving users, dealing with peripheral harms around needle use, getting the secondary and the satellite exchanges going, and working with other organizations that were doing needle exchange. So by 1990, end of 91, about 92, 93, another exchange started in Oakland called ACE, Alameda County Exchange in West Oakland, with a former NEED member, got kicked out of NEED and joined and help found the Alameda County Exchange in deep West Oakland. We started coordinating a lot with San Francisco, Santa Cruz, and Sacramento folks. We started collaborating a lot with UCSF primarily and the urban health study folks. So activist investigators like John Waters, Ricky Blumenthal, Rachel Anderson, Alex Kroll. You probably remember some of the other names. Were coming to our exchange and learning and telling us what was going on everywhere else. We were giving them information. We were very little involved in direct research at NEED site. We were kind of like, no. We were like, no media and no research at the site. But we were connected a lot with those, and we were involved in the founding and the work of an organization called CASIN, California Syringe Exchange Network, which we were expecting was going to grow, a network of needle exchanges in California that was doing political activism, demonstrations against Dan Lundgren, Pete Wilson, stuff like that. And these people were like we were going bill after bill after bill going to Sacramento, and these people were just, they would wait until it got passed and then veto. I think Pete Wilson vetoed 3 bills. Dan Lundgren, the Attorney General, was like a little Nazi dog running after us. We never got a direct hit from those folks, but it was happening in places where they were a lot more vulnerable. Other folks would get shut down pretty easily. So the CASIN folks were organizing, and we were connected still with NASIN, North American Syringe Exchange Network, which I think is a really important organization in the history of needle exchange, because they basically enabled us and dozens of other organizations to do the work, get them the supplies and teach them how to do things and stand back and let them do their own thing. And then the Harm Reduction Coalition coalesced with a lot of our friends and ilk were being a part of the Harm Reduction Coalition. It was like in San Francisco and in the East Coast. And the Harm Reduction Coalition, that's when we discovered in the early mid-90s, I remember Ricky came over from San Francisco, one of the researchers, and said, yeah, you know what you guys are doing? It's called harm reduction. We're like, harm reduction? That sounds great. And we learned a lot about it, just like a ding. Oh yeah, that makes perfect sense. You mean non-judgmentally giving people the things they need to do and the skills they need in order not to die? Because yeah, and we're like, wow, this is great. So we learned. That was really fun. I love the idea of like researchers following you around and explaining what it is that you're doing, so you don't have to think of it yourself. That's really what happened with Needle Exchange. And harm reduction was a whole world. It was like a moment, because it was more than just needle exchange. And then, and I'll stop at the mid-90s when, what's his name? The Hungarian guy, what's his name again? The money guy. George Soros put a whole bunch of money into his group, had a whole bunch of money, and they said, we want to help real democracy. What's the biggest threat to democracy in the United States? The war on drugs. They found out. They did their research. And we want to put millions of dollars into fighting against the war on drugs. And harm reduction was just right in the sweet spot at that moment. So money started coming to us in lots of different ways, but it's almost all traceable back to George Soros through the Open such and such, the Drug Policy Open Society, Drug Policy Foundation, HRC. There was a whole bunch of different harm reduction coalition, a bunch of different middle people that were giving us money, and we were writing grants to this one, that one, and that one, and that one. And by the mid-90s, we had a lot more money, so we could distribute needles. We could do wound care. We could distribute Narcan and start teaching people how to do Narcan. We could pay some of our volunteer stipends, and we could buy a truck, a mobile thing, instead of using John L's white van that had a homeless guy, what's his name, was living in it the whole time. That's a good trivia question. What was that guy's name?
tall guy?
No, he
Oh.
wasn't tall.
It was a Berkeley Bob.
No.
It's okay.
So I'll stop at around the mid 90s, and